The desert lay silent under the burning sun, yet silence here was never safety. A shadow slid across the cracked earth, too large to belong to any living creature known today. Hunters had whispered of bones buried in the sands of Mongolia, but what stirred now was no relic. It moved with strength and purpose, a survivor of ages past. The team of explorers thought they were chasing fossils, yet they had awakened something that had waited patiently beneath stone and dust. Electrosaurus had returned, and its hunger would test the courage of all who crossed its path. The Gobi Desert stretched endlessly like an ocean of stone and fire. Its rolling dunes shifted with every gust of wind, its jagged cliffs sliced across the horizon like ancient monuments. For most, the desert was lifeless, a place where survival itself was a victory. Yet for a handful of scientists, it was a land of treasure. The bones of giants lay buried here, waiting to be uncovered by those with patience, skill, and courage. Dr. Elias Grant was among those few. An experienced paleontologist, he had devoted 2 decades to understanding the rise and fall of predatory dinosaurs. His peers sometimes mocked his obsession with a little-known predator called Electrosaurus. To them, it was a footnote in history, a fragmentary specimen dug up in Mongolia nearly a century ago. But to Elias, the mystery of Electrosaurus was irresistible. Its name meant unmarried lizard. Yet in his eyes, it was a predator that had ruled long before the tyrant lizards of the West. He believed that new fossils could rewrite the history of theropods and prove that Asia once rivaled North America in power and diversity. That belief had brought him here. Alongside him was his small expedition team. There was Sarah Juan, a geologist whose sharp eyes read the layers of rock like pages in a book. There was Luis Ortega, a photographer who had joined to capture the stark beauty of the desert and perhaps the discovery of a lifetime. And there was Nergui, a local guide whose ancestors had wandered these deserts for generations. Each of them came for different reasons, yet they all shared one truth. The desert tested everyone equally. The first days of the expedition went according to plan. They mapped exposed cliffs, brushed away sand that revealed long-buried fossils, and cataloged fragments of bone that hinted at creatures yet unnamed. Every night they gathered around a small fire, while the desert winds howled like distant voices. Nergui told them stories of beasts that once walked here, legends passed down from herders and nomads. Most dismissed these tales as folklore, yet Elias listened carefully. Myths often hid kernels of truth. The more they dug, the more Elias grew convinced that Electrosaurus was near. He found teeth serrated and curved sharper than any desert predator of today. He found impressions in stone that suggested powerful legs built for speed. He even uncovered a fragment of skull with ridges that hinted at something unique, something dangerous. Each discovery tightened the thread of anticipation that ran through the camp. They were not just chasing fossils anymore. They were following the trail of a hunter. But it was not just excitement that filled Elias's thoughts. There was unease, too. On the 3rd night, strange tremors shook the camp. The ground rumbled faintly as if something moved deep beneath the desert. Luis laughed it off, blaming distant storms. Sarah argued it was shifting sand. But Elias could not shake the feeling that the desert was alive, watching and waiting. On the 5th morning, their work revealed something astonishing. Sarah uncovered a half-buried footprint preserved in hardened clay. It was enormous, larger than any they had seen before. The 3-toed print was sharp and fresh, as if pressed only days ago, though it lay beneath layers of hardened dust. Elias crouched over it silent, his fingers tracing the edge. Something was wrong. Fossils could not be this fresh. Nergui stood back, her face pale. She spoke softly in her own language and in halting English. The hunters walk again. The others laughed nervously, yet Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. For the first time in his career, he wondered if he was not simply studying history. Perhaps he had stumbled into something that history had not yet finished writing. The desert seemed to lean closer around them, silent and vast. In that silence, Elias felt it again, a low vibration running to the ground like the heartbeat of something immense. The hunt had not ended. It was only beginning. The discovery of the strange footprint changed everything. Until then, the expedition had been about bones and fragments of the past. But now the team could not shake the thought that something larger and more immediate was hidden beneath the desert silence. The footprint looked too sharp, too deliberate, to belong to a fossil preserved for millions of years. Elias examined it again under the morning sun. The print was deep pressed hard into clay that should have eroded long ago. "This makes no sense," he muttered half to himself. Sarah crouched beside him, her brow furrowed. "Erosion should have wiped this out thousands of years ago. Yet it looks like it was made yesterday." Luis raised his camera, snapping pictures with a nervous grin. "Well, if this is a hoax, it is a convincing one. Maybe someone wants to play tricks on paleontologists." But Nerdwe did not laugh. She touched the edge of the print with her hand, her voice low. "The hunters do not sleep. They wait." Her words lingered heavy in the air. That night unease rippled through the camp. Luis joked more than usual, trying to chase away the tension. Sarah buried herself in field notes, refusing to admit the shiver she felt whenever the desert winds whistled over cliffs. Elias sat apart from them, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the fire. The strange tremors had returned, faint but rhythmic, like footsteps in the distance. He told himself it was the shifting of the desert, but part of him knew better. The next morning, while mapping a ridge, Sarah spotted something unusual. Across the cliff face ran a jagged scar carved into the rock itself. It looked like claw marks long and parallel, slicing deep into the stone. She called Elias over, and together they traced the grooves. They were far too large to belong to any modern animal. Luis tried to joke again, but even he could not hide the unease twisting his face. By midday, the team uncovered something even more startling. Half buried in a dune lay the skeleton of a camel, its bones snapped and scattered. Nerdwe knelt beside it, her face grim. The animal had not died from thirst or exhaustion. The ribs were shattered, crushed by something powerful. The neck bones were torn apart as though wrenched by massive jaws. Elias stood frozen, staring at the broken carcass. Fossils were supposed to tell stories of creatures long gone, not of predators still at work. The implications were staggering. If Electrosaurus or something like it still walked the desert, then they were not merely studying history. They were intruding into the territory of a living hunter. That night no one laughed. The fire seemed smaller than before, struggling against the darkness. The tremors grew louder, almost steady like a pulse. Luis lowered his camera, whispering, "That is not shifting sand." Sarah finally admitted what Elias had feared. If something is alive out there, it has been watching us. The realization turned their scientific mission into a fight for survival. Every shadow beyond the fire seemed to move. Every gust of wind carried the suggestion of heavy breathing. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. Then came the sound. A distant roar rolled across the cliffs, shaking loose sand and pebbles. It was deep, raw, and powerful, carrying with it the unmistakable weight of a predator announcing its presence. The team froze, each of them staring into the darkness. Luis's hand trembled on his camera. Sarah's notebook slipped from her fingers. Nerdwe closed her eyes, whispering words Elias could not understand. Elias felt his heart pound. He had studied Electrosaurus for years in books and bones, but never had he imagined hearing it alive. The roar was unlike anything he had ever known, ancient and commanding. It was not just the voice of a predator. It was the voice of the desert itself. In that moment, the expedition changed. They were no longer explorers chasing fossils. They were prey trapped in the hunting grounds of a beast thought lost to time. And somewhere beyond the cliffs, in the shifting dunes of the Gobi, the Electrosaurus moved. The morning after the roar of the desert seemed unnaturally still. No breeze rustled the sparse tufts of grass. The air felt heavy, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Elias rose before the others, staring toward the horizon, where shadows clung to the dunes. His rational mind insisted there had to be an explanation, yet the echo of that roar refused to leave him. When Sarah emerged from her tent, her face pale from a restless night, she muttered, "We should leave Elias." She rubbed her arms against the chill of the morning. "Whatever is out here, it is not something we can study. We are not prepared for this." But Elias shook his head. "If it truly is Electrosaurus, do you understand what that means? Proof that it survived extinction. This would be the greatest discovery of our time." Luis, who had overheard, scoffed, though his voice wavered. "Or the last discovery we ever make." Nerdwe silently poured water into a small bowl and sprinkled it on the sand, her lips moving in a chant. When Sarah asked what she was doing, Nerdwe replied flatly in offering, "The hunter must be respected, or it will take what it wants." The uneasy silence stretched. Elias knew the expedition's purpose was being tested. He wanted evidence, bones, photographs, anything to prove what they had heard. Yet beneath his scientific hunger, he felt fear gnawing at him. Tracks in the sand. Later that day, while surveying a nearby canyon, Sarah spotted them first. Tracks' giant three-toed impressions pressed deep into the sand, winding between boulders and vanishing into shadow. Each print was nearly as long as her arm. The group gathered around the trail, their voices hushed. Luis knelt and placed his hand inside one print. Too big for any known predator today. Not a bird, not a lizard, not anything modern. His voice cracked. "It is real." Elias touched the print, his pulse racing. It was undeniable. These were fresh tracks. The edges still sharp, undisturbed by wind. Whatever had made them had passed through only hours ago. The discovery sent adrenaline surging through Elias. "We have to follow it," he insisted. Sarah's eyes widened in alarm. "Are you insane? Follow it? This thing could kill us." "We are already in its territory," Elias replied grimly. Turning back without answers would mean this was all for nothing. Reluctantly, Sarah and Luis agreed, though both with dread in their expressions. Nerdwe said nothing, only tightened her grip on the small charm she wore around her neck. Signs of the predator. The trail led them deeper into the canyon. As the sun climbed the walls, the stone glowed a fiery red, yet inside the gorge shadows pooled like water. Strange noises echoed overhead. Rocks tumbled as if disturbed. Sarah flinched at every sound, her nerves fraying. Around a bend, they found another sign. A half-eaten carcass of a wild goat, its body torn open, its flesh raggedly stripped. Flies buzzed in thick clouds over the ruin. Luis turned away, gagging. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, horrified. Elias studied the remains closely. The bones were cracked by tremendous force. Large teeth marks scored across the ribs. "This is no scavenger," he whispered. "It hunts. It kills cleanly like a predator at the top of the chain." Nerdwe's voice was solemn. "The hunter is not blind. It knows we are here. Every step we take it watches." Her words unsettled them all. Elias looked up at the canyon rim, half expecting to see a shadow staring down. But there was nothing, only silence. The first attack. By late afternoon, the team reached a narrow passage where the canyon walls pressed close. Here the trail ended, lost in a tangle of rocks and dunes. Elias insisted they rest and regroup. Sarah protested again, wanted to turn back, but fatigue forced them to pause. It was then the first attack came. A sudden crash thundered above them. Rocks cascaded down from the ridge. Luis shouted, diving aside as boulders smashed into the sand. Out of the dust, a shadow moved, a massive form slinking across the canyon wall. The Electrosaurus appeared. It was larger than any predator Elias had ever imagined. Its body stretched over 10 meters long, its back ridged with muscle, its skull narrow yet powerful, lined with serrated teeth. Sunlight glinted off its scales as it roared, shaking the canyon walls. Panic erupted. Luis raised his camera, instinctively snapping a blurred photo, before Elias dragged him down. Sarah screamed for them to run. The ground shook with each step of the beast as it descended the slope with terrifying speed. They fled. Sand slipped beneath their feet as they sprinted through the canyon. Behind them, the predator thundered closer, its roar echoing like a storm. Rock splintered as its claws scraped the stone. Somehow they squeezed into a narrow fissure between boulders. The Electrosaurus lunged its head, striking the rocks, its teeth snapping just short of Elias's leg. Dust rained as it rammed again, but the passage was too small. With a frustrated bellow, the creature withdrew, pacing just beyond reach. Its eye gleamed in the shadows, golden and furious. The team huddled, trembling. Sarah clutched Elias's arm, whispering, "We are going to die here." But Elias's gaze remained fixed on that eye, shining with primal intelligence. Eventually, the predator retreated, its heavy footsteps fading. But its absence brought no relief. They knew it had not given up. It was waiting. Descent into terror. The team pressed deeper into the fissure, crawling through darkness until they emerged into another canyon. Their relief was short-lived. Signs of the beast were everywhere. Shattered bones scattered across the sand gouges in the stone where claws had raked. That night they camped without a fire, too fearful of drawing attention. The desert grew colder, yet sweat clung to their skin. Every sound seemed amplified. The skitter of insects, the distant cry of vultures. At one point, Louis swore he heard breathing close by, slow and deliberate. When he turned his flashlight, only shadows greeted him. Sarah finally broke the silence. We cannot keep running. It is playing with us like a cat with a mouse. Elias knew she was right. This was not random pursuit. The Electrosaurus was hunting them with patience and strategy. It was the apex predator of its age brought into theirs. Conflict among the team. Fear began to fracture their unity. Luis accused Elias of leading them into danger for the sake of science. "You care more about your career than our lives," he shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "That is not true," Elias snapped, though doubt pricked at him. Had his obsession blinded him? Sarah sided with Luis, demanding they abandon the mission, but Elias refused. "If we survive and prove this, it changes everything. We cannot walk away." Nergui intervened quietly. "The hunter does not care for your arguments. It only cares that you are here, and it will not stop." Her words silenced them. The lair. The following day they stumbled upon something extraordinary and horrifying. Hidden in a collapsed cave lay what could only be the lair. Bones littered the ground, countless skeletons of animals dragged here over time. Some were ancient, weathered to dust. Others were recent, with flesh still clinging. In the center lay a massive nest-like hollow pressed into the earth. Large eggshell fragments scattered about. Sarah froze, staring at them. "It is breeding here," she whispered. The realization struck them with full weight. This was not just one creature. It was a lineage, a surviving relic of the past, thriving in secret. Suddenly the ground trembled. From the shadows, the air inside the cavern was suffocating thick with the stench of decay and dust. Bones cracked beneath their boots as the team froze, their eyes fixed on the monstrous shape emerging from the shadows. The Electrosaurus filled the chamber, its scales glinting like steel under faint beams of light. Its chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Each exhale rolled out in a growl that shook the air. Elias's heart pounded, so hard he thought it might burst. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, yet his legs were rooted to the ground. Sarah whispered hoarsely, "We cannot fight this. We need to run." But there was no way out. The narrow fissure they had crawled through lay behind the beast. It had cornered them in its lair. The predator lowered its head, eyes gleaming with hunger. With a sudden lunge, it charged. The team scattered as the ground shook with the impact of its massive claws. Louis screamed, diving behind a cluster of bones, as the beast snapped its jaws, missing him by inches. Shards of bone flew through the air. Elias grabbed Sarah, pulling her behind a boulder, as the tail whipped past, crashing against a stone and sending cracks through its surface. The roar that followed was deafening. It was not just sound, it was fury incarnate, a desperate plan. Pinned between the walls of the cavern and the beast, Elias's mind raced. He had no weapons, no tranquilizers, just flares, ropes, and the determination to survive. His gaze fell on the jagged rocks above the lair ceiling. A thought sparked. "Bring it under the arch," he shouted over the noise. "If we can bring those rocks down, we might trap it." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "That is insane. It is the only chance we have." Luis crawled from his hiding spot, terror etched across his face. "And what if it does not work? We die faster. Then we die trying instead of waiting." Elias snapped. The beast turned its head to Golden, eye locking on Elias. It lunged again, teeth gnashing. Elias barely rolled aside as the jaws clamped where he had been a moment earlier. Sand and bone splintered under the force. "Over here!" Sarah screamed, waving her arms to draw its attention. The predator roared and swung toward her. The chase in the cavern. Sarah sprinted across the lair, weaving between piles of bones as the Electrosaurus thundered after her. Its claws gouged trenches into the earth, its strides impossibly long. She stumbled but caught herself, gasping as the beast's breath scorched her back. Elias and Luis scrambled to the arch of stone above the lair. Jagged cracks ran through its surface, evidence of centuries of pressure. Elias thrust a flare into Luis's hands. "When it is beneath the arch, use the heat on those fissures. Maybe the stone will give." Luis looked horrified. "That is not science. That is madness." "Do it," Elias barked. Under the arch. Sarah darted beneath the arch, barely avoiding the swipe of the creature's claws. "Now!" Elias shouted. Luis lit the flare and pressed it into the cracks. Smoke curled up with the heat, licking at the weakened stone. Nothing happened. Luis cursed, slamming the flare harder against the rock. The Electrosaurus barreled beneath the arched jaws, snapping at Sarah. At the last second, she threw herself behind a boulder. The beast crashed against it, its body momentarily pinned beneath the arch. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Pebbles rained down. "Come on," Elias urged. The predator jerked upward, thrashing against the rock. The ground quaked as if the earth itself resisted its fury. Then, with a thunderous crack, the ceiling gave way. Collapse. A torrent of stone cascaded down, engulfing the Electrosaurus. The roar that followed was unlike anything Elias had ever heard. A scream of rage and pain mixed with the primal defiance of a creature that refused to die. Dust and debris filled the cavern, blinding them. When the echoes faded, silence reigned, broken only by the rasp of their own breath. The team staggered, coughing through the haze. The beast lay, partially buried, its body pinned under massive slabs of stone. Its tail twitched weakly. Its golden eye still burned with hatred, but the rest of its body was trapped. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing with relief. Luis slumped against the wall, muttering prayers in Spanish. Elias stood frozen, staring at the predator that had haunted them for days. For a moment he felt sorrow. Here was a survivor from another age, a marvel of evolution, reduced to a prisoner of stone. But then the creature shifted again, its claws scraping against the rock. It was not dead. Not yet. Final stand. Elias knew if it freed itself, they were finished. He grabbed another flare and ran toward the rubble. Sarah screamed, "What are you doing?" "I have to finish it," Elias shouted. He leapt onto the stones and thrust the burning flare toward the creature's exposed head. The predator roared, snapping its jaws dangerously close. Heat and smoke filled Elias's lungs, but he pressed forward, forcing the flare closer. The beast thrashed in agony. The stones above shifted, threatening to collapse further. With one final defiant roar, the Electrosaurus lashed out its tail, whipping violently. Elias was thrown back, crashing onto the sand. The flare tumbled into a crevice, igniting more debris. Smoke rose thicker and flames licked across the nest. The predator shrieked in fury, but the added weight of the collapsing rocks sealed its fate. One last roar echoed, then faded into silence. The cavern trembled, but at last it was over. The cavern was silent save for the faint crackle of smoldering flames. The dust that filled the air drifted slowly downward, settling on the rubble that now entombed the Electrosaurus. Elias sat slumped against a rock, his chest heaving. His arms trembled with exhaustion, and his ears rang with the fading echo of the beast's last roar. Sarah crouched beside him, her hand pressed to his shoulder. "We survived," she whispered, though her voice carried no triumph. It sounded more like disbelief. Her eyes scanned the cavern, as if expecting the predator to rise again from the stones. Louis staggered forward, limping with each step. His camera hung useless around his neck, cracked and covered in ash. He wiped sweat and dust from his brow and said in a broken voice, "I thought we would never see daylight again." He gave a short, bitter laugh, then fell silent. Elias lifted his head and gazed at the collapsed lair. Part of him expected to see that golden eye burning through debris, but there was nothing, just the weight of stone and the faint hiss of fire dying in the cracks. A strange hollowness filled him. They had fought for their lives, and won, yet it felt less like victory and more like tragedy. Nergui stood apart from them, her figure silhouetted against the faint glow of their last remaining flare. Her expression was unreadable. She finally said, "The hunter has returned to the mountain." It was not meant to live in this age. Her words carried a solemn finality. The journey out, the air grew heavier with smoke and dust. Elias forced himself to his feet, ignoring the ache in his ribs. "We cannot stay. The cavern is unstable. If it collapses again, we will be buried with it." Sarah nodded, helping Luis steady himself. The three of them followed Nergui, who seemed to know the labyrinth of tunnels, as if guided by memory. The path twisted and wound upward through narrow passages where they scraped shoulders against jagged stone. Every sound echoed, the crunch of gravel under boots, the drip of water from unseen cracks. Their bodies screamed with fatigue, yet fear pushed them onward. The memory of the Electrosaurus's roar lingered like a phantom, urging them to move faster. Each time the ground rumbled beneath their feet, their hearts leapt, fearing the mountain itself would come down upon them. After what felt like endless climbing, they finally reached a fissure that opened into the night. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of earth and pine. They crawled out one by one, collapsing onto the forest floor. Above them, the sky stretched vast and black, scattered with stars. For the first time in days, they could breathe without fear. Processing the aftermath, they sat in silence under the starlight. Sarah leaned back against a tree, staring at the constellations with glassy eyes. "We found proof of what we came for," she said quietly. "But no one will ever truly understand what we saw. They will see fossils. They will see our notes. But they will never hear its roar or feel the ground shake beneath its feet." Luis held the broken camera in his lap. "The world will call me mad. They will laugh at my story. But I will never forget. I will never let it go." He paused, his hands tightening around the strap. It deserved more than this. It deserved to live free, not die under stone. Elias closed his eyes. The image of the beast pinned under rock replayed in his mind. He remembered its defiance even in defeat. It had not been a monster. It had been a survivor, a relic of another age that fate had stranded in theirs. A quiet understanding. Nergui sat apart from them, her gaze fixed on the mountains, rising like shadows against the stars. Her voice was calm when she spoke. Creatures like that are not meant for men to conquer or cage. They belong to the earth, and the earth always takes back what is hers. Her words settled heavily among them. For the first time, Elias felt the weight of what they had done, not just to survive, but to history itself. They had ended something ancient. They had silenced a living echo of the past. Sarah looked at Elias. "So what now? Do we tell the world? Or do we keep it buried with the mountain?" Elias did not answer at once. His gaze lingered on the tree line where shadows swayed with the wind. Finally, he said, "The world is not ready for the truth. They will see it as myth, or worse, a target for greed. We carry this memory. That will have to be enough." The dawn rose slowly over the Mongolian steppe, painting the horizon in soft hues of orange and gold. The three survivors stood together at the edge of the forest, gazing at the mountains where the Electrosaurus had made its last stand. The land looked calm and timeless, but each of them carried scars that would never fade. Elias tightened the straps of his pack and breathed deeply of the cool morning air. His mind replayed the moments of their battle, the roar of the shaking ground, the desperate flight through the tunnels. He thought of the beast buried beneath stone and ash. A silence hung in his chest like a weight. Sarah approached, holding her field journal close against her chest. Its pages were filled with sketches, notes, and hurried words written during the chaos. She looked at Elias, her expression solemn yet steady. "We should write it all, every detail. Someday, maybe the world will understand." Luis still carried his broken camera. The lens shattered, the casing dented. He lifted it once more toward the mountains, as if trying to capture one last memory, though the device was long beyond repair. "I wanted the world to see it," he whispered, "to believe. But maybe it was never meant for them. Maybe it was meant only for us." Elias placed a hand on Luis's shoulder. "We saw it. That matters. We carry the truth, even if no one else will." A choice of silence. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah began to walk toward the low valley that would lead them back to civilization. "When we return, what will we say?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "If we tell the truth, they will think us mad. If we lie, we betray what happened." Elias thought for a long moment before replying. "We will tell them we found fossils, that the mountain hid the bones of a great predator. It will satisfy their curiosity, but protect the secret. The living creature must rest in peace. Let the world think it belongs to the past." Luis looked torn, but in the end he nodded. "Perhaps that is best. It deserves to remain a legend, not a spectacle." Nergui, who had been standing quietly nearby, finally spoke. Her voice carried a steady calm that seemed older than the mountains themselves. "You have walked with something ancient and lived. That is enough. The spirits of the land will guard the rest." Her words sealed a moment like a vow, leaving the mountains behind. Their journey back through the steppe was long, but no longer haunted by fear. The land stretched wide and endless, the grasses waving in the wind like an ocean of green. At night, They camped beneath the stars, listening to the whispers of the wind and the distant cries of unseen creatures. Each step carried them further from the mountain, but none of them forgot the sound of the Electrosaurus's roar echoing in their hearts. When at last they reached the edges of human settlement, they looked like weary travelers scarred by storms and hardship. To the people they told a simple tale, that the expedition had uncovered fossilized remains deep within the mountain caves. They showed sketches and fragments of rock to satisfy questions. No one suspected the truth, and so the secret remained. The legacy? Years later, Elias would sit at his desk in a quiet, study his hair, graying his hands, still steady, as he turned the pages of Sarah's journal. He would read the lines that described the fire in the beast's eyes, the thunder of its steps, the final battle beneath the mountain. Sometimes he would close his eyes and hear it again, the living echo of an ancient world. Luis would tell stories to his children, speaking of courage and survival, but never revealing the full truth. In his heart, the image of the Electrosaurus remained sharp and eternal. Sarah would publish books on fossils and prehistory, her words shaping how the world understood the age of dinosaurs. Yet in the margins of her private notes, she always wrote the one that lived, the one they left beneath the mountain. And Nergui would vanish back into land, becoming part of the steppe itself, like a spirit fading into legend. Final reflection. The mountain still stands silent, its peaks carved by wind and time. Deep beneath the stone lies the resting place of the last Electrosaurus. The world believes it gone lost to history. Only 3 souls know the truth, that it walked the earth again, if only for a brief moment. Its roar no longer shakes the valleys, but its memory endures. Not as a tale of terror, but as a reminder of the power of life to endure against impossible odds. In the end, the beast was not defeated. It simply returned to the earth that had birthed it, and those who survived carried its legacy not in bones or photographs, but in memory, a memory that would never fade.